You're listening to the Balanced Educator Podcast, episode number 134. Welcome to the Balanced Educator. We're your hosts, Kaylee
and Josiane from EduCalm. Our intention is to equip and empower you to feel more calm, balanced, and joyful in all aspects of your life.
Hello there and welcome. We are so excited to have you here with us today. So, supporting struggling learners can be a challenge, especially when we don't know the root of the problem or really which strategies we should employ in a specific situation. So in this episode, we've invited educational therapists Rachel Kapp and Stephanie Pitts from Learn Smarter, the Educational Therapy Podcast, to teach us about educational therapy and how educational therapists support learners, teachers, and families. Rachel and Stephanie teach us about the role of executive functioning in learning and how to support students in developing their executive function skills and what we can do better as teachers to support them. They also give really practical tips for motivating disengaged learners that you can really apply into your classroom practices. There are super actionable takeaways in this episode that you'll be able to start bringing into your in-person or virtual classroom right away. So I think you're really going to enjoy it. But first, we're very excited to share this week's sponsor. So we recently heard from a community college professor who's been teaching for over 30 years. Her name is Ginny Horan, and she has seen students struggling more and more with college work and time management, despite all the advances in technology. Time management is the number one reason students drop out of college. She decided to teach her students how to use a paper planner to manage their time, and they said it was life-changing. By writing down their commitments and schedule by hand, and by being able to see their week, the paper planner tapped into visual learning and the brain activation that happens when we write, rather than just tap. She also wanted to provide college students tips and mindfulness and gratitude prompts each week. So she created the Centered Student Planner, which includes a link to a private video channel with college success tutorials. The CSP sold out last year despite the pandemic. It's an amazing tool for high school and college-bound students and a perfect graduation gift. And right now they're offering a free printable booklet called The Go-To Guide to Finals. When you sign up on their website at www.thecenteredstudentplanner.com. Again, that's www.thecenteredstudentplanner.com. Now, this is the perfect sponsor for this episode because you'll see we're going to be talking about how we need to actually teach our students these executive function skills of planning and time management. So this ties in really well. And it might be a tool that you want to recommend to your students, especially high school students. All right, let's get into this interview. Hello there, Rachel and Steph. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Balanced Educator Podcast.
Thanks so much for having us.
We are super excited to have you today because we love what you share on your podcast and on your social media channels. We think it'll be very helpful for educators. So can we start out by getting you guys to each take a minute to introduce yourselves and then talk about how you got into educational therapy?
Sure. So let's introduce ourselves first, and then we can each go back into our backstory. So my name is Rachel Kapp. I'm an educational therapist in private practice in Beverly Hills, California. I have a group practice, and of course, we're doing virtual, but during normal times, we're all in person in my offices. We primarily work with learners with ADHD, executive functioning, writing, math remediation issues, but we do serve all students from little dudes, as Steph would say, all the way through adulthood.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I'm Stephanie Pitts, and I have a group practice in Redondo Beach, California. And we work with kids of every learning profile, every situation, kindergarten all the way through. We've worked with adults, parents, people in graduate school. We do, all the reading, writing, math, executive functioning, studying, anxiety, all the things, processing, all of that. So yeah, it's just we just do all the things. I like doing all the things. Keeps it interesting.
That's great. So let's hear how you guys got into educational therapy.
So, Kayla, does your audience know what ed therapy is? Should we start there?
Yeah, let's start there. I like that idea.
Okay. So educational therapy means that we work one-on-one with learners with different learning profiles. We teach them how to be independent, autonomous learners in the classroom and in life, and we use their learning profile to their own advantage. Steph has a slightly different explanation, but go for it. Steph.
So I say we teach students how to learn and who they are as learners.
I love that. I love that.
So my background was that I was teaching preschool and I knew I wanted more. I had risen through the ranks rather quickly at this school, and I was really, really enjoying the opportunity to see, even at 4.5 years old, the different learning profiles of all the students in my class. And I had learned so much during my time teaching preschool because you have to be so explicit with little dudes. And I was looking for something more, and I knew I wanted to specialize, but I didn't want to be a speech pathologist. That didn't feel right or natural to me. I didn't want to be an occupational therapist, all those kind of well-known avenues that you can take if you want to be able to dig in on one area and work more one-on-one with learners. And so I really just started researching graduate programs, and that is how I found out about educational therapy. And of course, once I started talking about it, suddenly there was a parent in my class whose sister-in-law was an ed therapist. So I started to become more part of the community in LA, and I went to grad school and got my master's in special ed and my certification in educational therapy through that program. That's where I met Steph. Go for it, Steph. What brought you to meeting me?
Meeting Rachel. So I was a teacher, and I actually left teaching and worked for a family, teaching them while we traveled the world. And they have quite a few kids. And I was doing educational therapy without officially doing educational therapy. And when one of the children needed an educational therapist, we hired that person. They came into the home, and I was watching what they were doing, and I said, I can do this. So I went back to school, got my postmaster's certificate in educational therapy where I met Rach, and then we finished that. We both started our own private practices.
Wonderful. So with ed therapy, then, you guys are primarily working one-on-one with students. Am I understanding that correctly?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have that. We look at it as a luxury to be able to do that, because that's what makes the remediation and the instruction and the strategies we're offering so individualized.
Love that. I know that for myself, I had done a lot of tutoring, and I worked as an educational assistant before I finished my teaching degree and then became a teacher. And when I first got into the classroom, I really struggled with going from that one-on-one time where you can really individualize your instruction for each student to going to a big classroom where you can see that each student needs individual attention, but you don't always have the time to do that. So I'd love to know how your work kind of benefits that classroom instruction and how that sort of relationship between teacher and then educational therapist works.
Such a good question. I don't know that we've ever been asked that. We talk about that on our podcast, but I don't know that we've ever been asked that. Steph, go for it.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that's so amazing about the one-on-one situation, and we're very different from tutoring because we're not doing content. A tutor is doing just content, and we use the content to teach the strategies. And so if that means you're in my office playing a game or jumping on the trampoline or whatever it is to engage you and to be able to help your brain be the most efficient and, and for you to love learning, honestly. So the thing that comes up a lot is I have a lot of students who are ADHD who really struggle sitting down in the classroom. And they, want to walk around, or they need a bouncy seat or whatever. So one of the things that I think really comes up that's a great partnership between teachers and educational therapists is, we're meant to be the case managers. We're the ones that talk to the teacher, talk to the parents, talk to any other allied professionals that might be on the team. So we're trying to be the team leader in that respect. And one of the things that when you have a good relationship with the child's teacher and we collaborate, it can be so beneficial. And sometimes that might look like, let's alter this assignment a little bit and let's have them do it this way instead. And this will get the result that you ultimately want. It just might not look the same as your other students. And eventually with the goal of getting it to be what you want it to look like, or what the traditional model looks like, right? But we just sometimes go around things in a different way. And sometimes I've had teachers that have said to me, wow, okay, I didn't even think of offering that or letting them do it that way. And they get this amazing, if it's a project, they might get this amazing result that they've never been able to see from a kid because they can't sit down and do it in that traditional manner. So I think the benefit of being able to work with an ed therapist with a student who's struggling can be so dramatic and so helpful for not only the kid and the teacher, but also the family, because everybody's so struggling to try to help support this kid, and not everybody knows how to do it. So I think that's where we come in, that is really beneficial for them. Rach?
It's one of my favorite things to get to collaborate with the teachers, because we, being former classroom teachers, we are not interested in adding to the burden and like adding to the plate of the teacher. Mm-hmm. Our job and the way we look at it is, how can we make this easier for you? This one kid is challenging for whatever reason. And what can we do in our session time that is going to support your goals as a classroom teacher? Mm-hmm. And starting from that place of openness and collaboration and really, what can I take off your plate, really leads to a spirit of partnership, because sometimes it is exactly what Steph has said, which is just offering an alternative. Sometimes it's about us previewing the information prior, because we're teaching learners, like, when you learn it, sometimes learning it, seeing it from two different people, it can solidify your knowledge. And so teaching them how to go out and seek that own knowledge to then back up. And so they see the information multiple times from multiple different avenues. So these are all the types of things that we can offer. And being that bridge between parent and teacher and family, because sometimes we're the only ones on the case who can hear the honest truth about what's going on, because teachers can't always say, parents don't always want to say. And so sometimes we're the only ones that know there's always
the scope. Yeah.
There's always like the parent's opinion, the teacher's opinion, the learner's opinion, the truth, what we witness and all that. So we're the ones who can like synthesize all that information and give everybody information that can be helpful in that process. So the collaboration aspect with teachers is one of my favorite things. I love getting to go into the schools too, the ones where we get the opportunity to work locally. It's so much fun to see how different schools are handling different issues, what they're experimenting with and what they're trying. It's just really fun as an educator to get a real sense, because your school intimately, but in this role we get to know lots of schools intimately in regards to how they respond to learners with different learning needs.
That's so great. So what is really coming to mind for me right now is, I'm teaching in a classroom. I can see that I have one student that's struggling as a teacher, and I want to make adaptations to help them to have the most success and to have the opportunity to learn and complete the assignment in the way that works for them. But I, as the teacher, don't necessarily know exactly how that kid's brain works, right? So I could see you guys coming in there and being so helpful in that situation to give me that feedback of what I can do better to support this child. So I'm so curious to know, what does that process look like for you as educational therapists to sort of figure out what each child needs?
It's a really good question. First of all, we don't figure it out on our own typically. A lot of the learners coming in have gone through extensive testing, whether they've done it through the IEP system or whether they've done it through private neuropsychological, clinical psychological testing. So we're coming in with the usually, it depends on every case. Sometimes we get the testing after. Sometimes we don't get the testing at all. Sometimes kids are just presenting in a certain way. But what I know Steph will say, because I know her so well, is like we don't treat the diagnosis. We really look at the presenting problem. So sometimes families can get these neuropsych reports and they're detailed and they're so rich in information, but then it comes with 20 accommodations and 20 recommendations. And how do you prioritize? Well, you prioritize by having someone like us who comes in and says, okay, this is the underlying, and this is what we have to address first because it's going to lay the groundwork for all the other things that we want to do. So we do go through a process of informal assessment for the first couple of sessions during our kind of assessment period. And then we're really establishing goals because we've heard what the parents said. Sometimes we've heard what the teacher said, but we really want to see what the kid is presenting as and then give them the best chance to show us their best self because we don't want to assume one day is representative of a trend necessarily.
Consistently inconsistent with the ADHD kids. I think just to add to that, we do get the testing, but sometimes, it's literally when a kid, even if they might not have the diagnosis, if a kid is presenting with, regardless of what's causing it, it's similar to ADHD, but it could be anxiety, it could be, who knows? We are using the same strategies because it's really the same thing that how it's presenting. And I use a lot of informal assessments of games, and I find out very quickly their threshold, how they approach problems, multi-step problem solving, which is something with executive functioning that affects everything in learning. And so with that, and then a lot of times, especially, even the little dudes, they can tell you when you ask them what's hard, they can tell you. They might not be able to tell you why, depending on their age or how it shows up, but they'll be able to tell you that, the kids that reading is hard or the kids that writing is hard when they have to write a story, they don't like it. And they're, going down to the fundamental reasons of why that actually is hard for them is what we're the detectives. We're trying to figure out what it is to help them shortcut, so to speak, and be able to get past what's hard in an easier way.
That's so interesting. So you mentioned executive functioning. I would love for you guys to dive in and explain to our audience that might not know what executive functioning is at all, kind of the what and the why and, why is this an important thing? And also the how. So all of the layers of executive functioning for, executive functioning 101, let's say.
Okay. So the first thing is that Steph and I are not neuropsychologists. So we're not going to necessarily give you the most scientific answer, but the most scientific that I can get is that executive functioning really develops in the frontal lobe of the brain, which doesn't fully develop until you're 25. We'll loop back on that. So what EF is, that's how we call it in the biz, is the ability to plan, organize, implement your life. And when it comes to school, a lot of the things that students are graded on are a result of the executive functioning. There's no way to purely assess, right? So we're looking at things like, is a child able to turn their homework in on time? That's an executive functioning skill. That's not an academic domain. Does this learner know when a test is happening? Can they follow along and understand a story? All of these domains are all encompassing under the umbrella term of executive functioning, and there really isn't tremendous consensus in the field on how to define it. But it's the ability to do life and all those other mechanisms that go into place: memory, word recall, retention. Steph, what would you add to
task
kind of this?
Initiation, prioritizing, understanding. Yeah, time management. And also it regulates emotions.
Yeah.
So executive functioning it's the foundation of how you live your life. And if you think about adults, and you have to do so much executive functioning every day that you probably don't even realize. I often have kids compare adulting to school. So what's the adulting version, right? It's knowing when your bills are due and paying them on time, knowing how long it takes you to get ready in the morning, and then how long it takes you to drive to work, and then in order to get there on time, knowing which things you need to do at work to get done today to meet that deadline, or how to chunk that you need to get, I don't know, all your laundry done and you have 15 loads, right? You're not going to do 15 loads in one day. So what's the most important thing that you need to do now? So executive functioning is one of those things that children, because the brain isn't developed, they need a lot of scaffolding, which is why teachers try to teach, okay, we do this first, and then we do this second and this third, because eventually you're going to need to be able to do that as an adult. And so when you really, there are so many people who have executive dysfunction. And additionally, everybody who's really great at executive functioning also have deficits, right? So I'm not good at every single thing in the category of executive functioning, and Rachel is not either. And so one of the things that's great about our partnership is we complement each other in a lot of those ways. But knowing that you can't be good at all the things all the time, we have learned how to adapt and what works for us, which is the same thing that we're trying to teach our students. What are they really good at? What seems naturally easy? Some kids come in and they just naturally know how to do things. And we don't explicitly teach executive functioning at school. So a lot of the kids that do really well are the kids that just naturally know how to do it. The kids that struggle are the ones that don't understand and they don't feel time, or they don't understand what is really being asked of them and how to use their memory and all of that. So it really affects the bigger picture of being successful as a student.
So do you guys, sorry, did you want to add to that before I ask the next question?
I was just is that okay?
Yeah.
I just wanted to add a couple of different thoughts. The first is we see a lot of executive dysfunction when students graduate from elementary school to middle school, because suddenly they're having to go to all these different classes. Assignments are no longer due the next day. We never explicitly teach students how to calendar necessarily, and if we do, we're not being explicit enough in saying, look, this assignment is due on this day, you need to put it on the day it's due, not the day it's assigned. Like, that's something we have to teach learners, because in elementary school you write it on the day it's assigned because it's just due the next day, or it's all due on Friday. And so we see a lot of kind of the wheels come off the wagon, so to speak, in that transition. And so that's a lot of the work that we get to do. But I wanted to give two other examples of executive functioning that I think are really easily understood. The first is planning a meal. So with planning a meal, you have to have time to find a recipe. You have to have time to go to the grocery store. How much are you going to buy? Are you doubling the meal? How many people are you serving? All these things play into it. And then how much time do you need to prep? Can you prep anything the night before? All those things that kind of go into planning a dinner party is entirely executive functioning. And then another example is planning a trip. How do you get to the airport? How long are you going to stay? Where are you going to stay every night? What time do you arrive? Is there a time change? What are the activities that you plan to do? Do any of those need to be purchased in advance? All those types of experiences all depend on really, really, really strong executive functioning, or something will fall through the cracks and it won't show up the way you want it to, which is exactly what happens to learners when their executive functioning skills are not at the level that they need to be. It's important to understand that executive functioning does not solidify until you're 25, but think about all the life that has to be lived. And when you're making that transition from elementary to middle, and you're really around age 10 and age 11, age 12, your executive functioning isn't developed, but the demands placed on it. And then parenting also changes during that period of time as kids are trying to assert their independence. It's really a complicated issue, which is why we spend a lot of time talking about it and with our teams and with our audience on our own podcast and here, because it's important to understand what's actually happening for the kids.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I know when I taught in middle school, I had started teaching in high school and then moving down to middle school, it was such an eye-opener for me, the skills that had to be taught on just how to organize a binder, how to use an agenda. And when I remember that first week of teaching grade 7 and 8, when I was, I had came from teaching grade 12 and I just wanted to jump right into the material. And I had this awesome like first week lesson thing planned. And then it took me a whole week just to go through like how to put dividers into your binder and then where to put your binder at the end of class so you don't lose it. And so that was such an eye-opener for me. I would love to know, what is something that teachers can do better, just in general, that you've noticed from being a teacher, from what you've learned in your education for educational therapy, and then in your practice? What's one or a couple things that teachers can do better to support learners in developing these executive functioning skills?
Okay, let's start with the binder because you brought it up. So it's really, really challenging for kids who struggle with executive functioning to hold on to what they need and have it on demand when they need it. And so one of the things that we really like to teach our learners who are struggling is that simple is better for these kids, meaning you don't want to have to force these types of students to make a decision. Because like, for example, I do a lot of math with kids and it's incredibly common that there will be like the brain dump or whatever sort of like brain exercise in the beginning and then a notes and the way the binder looks is like the brain section of warming up, and then you have to have a separate section for notes and then a separate section for tests. And at every single moment where a student has to make a decision about where a piece of paper goes, that's an opportunity for their EF skills to fail. And that's why a lot of the kids can't find where things go because they don't put it in the right place. So we teach a very just simple system of just organize it by date. If we can teach our kids to organize things by date and by time, so you just go to the next fresh piece of paper in your notebook, your kids will always be able to find what they need because they do usually have a sense of before and after. And so they can look in their notebook and they may not know the exact date that test 3 happened, but they know it was before test 4. So it naturally organizes. So parents will do this as well. In an effort to organize, they give all these things that people with strong EF really like. But for learners who struggle, simple is best, and removing how many decisions they have to make, which is why we also like all of the subjects in one notebook. Why? Because then you're always going to have what you need when you need it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Less things to lose or to put in the wrong place.
Yeah, it's just very practical. Steph, what do you think?
There's certain very specific things that I, have talked to teachers about this would help this learner or the kids with executive functioning. But I think I want to take a step back and just say, I think teachers need to give it language. I think that if we can talk about in the classroom what it is and what we're actually teaching them, that might help because, we're scaffolding, but they don't understand what the bigger picture is and what the goal is. And so I think if we can start talking about it and explicitly teaching it a little bit more, I think that will also help tremendously.
I like that. I can definitely see. So just to follow up on that as an example. So this is what I'm seeing. I have this project that it's quite a large project that I'm doing with my middle school or high school kids. I would communicate the learning outcome, like what's the point of this project in all. Then I would communicate the full, like what the project will look like when it's done. And then I'll show them how I've broken it down into kind of what needs to be done first and explain why I've broken it down. And then we start at step 1. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I think, even adding to that, it's okay, let's open up your agendas and let's put in the dates that are due, what's due on which date. Why are we putting that in? Let's backtrack now. Let's see if this is due on this date, what do you have to get done in order to have that done by that date? So helping them sort of just understand and get into the material of what each step looks like would be really helpful.
I would also add, you can even add the language of executive functioning. These are the executive functioning skills that you are going to be working on during this. And then when there is a failure, because there will be, you can say, okay, but look how well you did on 3 out of these 4 skills. It's just one area. And you know what? I noticed that in the last project too. I mean, we're talking about very individualized kind of things that can come as a result of these conversations. But if teachers were to do nothing else, I think using the language of executive functioning can be really helpful, making kids and parents aware, but then also talking about your own executive functioning failures. Oh my God, they love it. They love it when you're late. They love it when you forgot something or you weren't, oh, my executive functioning was really poor. You know why? I didn't really sleep last night. And that really impacts me. Or I didn't exercise this morning. And that really is what gets my brain going during the day, whatever that is. But it's what learners will remember from our session years down the road is, Rachel, do you remember that time that you double booked, which has only happened a handful of times in my life, but yes, I do. That was an EF failure. I didn't write it down on my calendar, or chances are I don't remember, but they remember. And so using those as an opportunity to teach your learners and show your own humanity it's a really powerful and vulnerable tool.
Yeah, I totally agree. And learners learn by example, and by being that example and modeling how you worked through your own struggles or your own mistakes. And so even just the fact that you're teaching them, oops, I made a mistake. I recognize that I made a mistake. And here's kind of my thought process of how I'm going to make sure I don't make this mistake again in the future.
Totally.
I think modeling that is just so important. I love that. So another thing I wanted to chat with you about today is about motivating disengaged learners. You guys talk about that on your podcast, and I'd love to hear just kind of your take on that for teachers that might be struggling with a couple of kids in their class that just don't seem to ever want to engage, no matter how interesting or fun you think the lessons that you've created are, but those learners just don't want to engage.
So, where we like to start with, first of all, motivation is a part of executive functioning. But where we like to start is that learners are sometimes only in your classroom for 9 months or 5 months or whatever it is. They have a whole history that they're coming in to your classroom, that they may have had a teacher that they did not appreciate the year prior and it put a sour taste in their mouth. Or for a lot of the kids that we work with, particularly once they go through puberty, they do begin to emotionally disconnect from learning and from school. Why? Because they've struggled for 7, 8 years and they've been told that it's not enough when they're working twice as hard and they're yielding half as much as their neurotypical or typically developing peers. And so it's actually a very healthy impulse to say, I'm not going to keep hitting my head against this particular wall. It does not feel good. And I've been doing it my whole life. So I'm going to go where the love is. That's a healthy impulse right then and there. The other thing that I'll say is that apathy can oftentimes be the result of a learning difference. So kids with inattentive ADHD do present as apathetic and like they don't care. It's not that they don't care. It's how their body is interacting with the world and experiencing the world. And it might not be of high interest to them. And so it's about understanding kind of the whole picture of what your child is walking into your classroom already experiencing. And then it becomes about motivating with external factors. So Steph, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think sometimes getting the parents involved is really helpful if you can. But I also think giving them some control is really helpful. And we always say success breeds success. So sometimes if you can alter or change an assignment or let them come up with their own prompt or their own something or other, that will motivate them because it seems easier to them, right? Because they shy away from things. The reason we fundamentally believe the reason kids don't do things is because it's hard, not because they don't want to or they don't care, any of that. So after, before puberty, there's kids want to please their teachers, they want to please their parents, they want to be the good kid, they want to do well. After puberty, that kind of goes out the window. And so external motivation is really going to be the big player in this. So if that means that, if they do this assignment, they get a homework pass, so they don't have to do homework that night. Or if they can get, extra recess time or, whatever it looks like, giving them, especially kids that have ADHD, they need immediate gratification. So it can't be, oh, well, if you do this today, I'll let you do that next week. That's way too far off. And they don't feel time the same way that we do, or a neurotypical child does, rather. And so that feels like a lifetime. And so if you can help them with externally motivating them in the moment or as close to the moment as possible, you will see a shift and be able to have different results. And if that means that, you can have a student that, seems apathetic and doesn't care about this subject, if they want to teach the class about a subject that they're really interested in or something like that, that is demonstrating the same skills on some of the projects that you might assign. So giving them some choice sometimes really helps, but also on the flip side, you have kids that really struggle with choice. So, I think, and it's hard because we don't want to give teachers more work, but at the same time, where does the more work get put in? Is it dealing with the apathetic student and they can't motivate them? Or is it you spending the time adjusting what is being asked of each student? I think it probably ends up being the same at the end of the day.
Yeah. And like you said, it really depends on each student. It's can't really put a blanket umbrella on everything. And it's always about adjusting to the kids that you have in front of you, or the one student that you have in front of you. Well, what you guys have shared today, I think is going to be really helpful for a lot of teachers in understanding how to support students that are struggling in their classrooms. Is there any other last tidbits you'd like to share with teachers that, let's say, maybe some of the biggest lessons that you've learned that after starting your educational therapy practice, if you're like, man, I wish I had known this when I was still in the classroom, what would that be?
I have two thoughts on that. The first is I do want to reiterate that we have really solidified our belief that all learners want to please. And when they're not meeting expectations, it's not time to blame. It's time to get curious about why. And then the second thing that I think I've really learned from the luxury of being able to transition out of the classroom and into this one-on-one work is that parents really appreciate the truth. And as difficult as it is to deliver it, and if the parent is the bottleneck in the child's success, that can be really, really challenging. But we have the luxury of being able to say, look, this is what we're witnessing, and we want you to make some changes too, because we always say the unintended but beautiful byproduct of good educational therapy is that home life improves as a result. Mm-hmm. And part of that goes along with the parent coaching that we get to be able to do as a result of the one-on-one work. But I have found that when I have had those really, really difficult conversations with parents, those conversations that like make your heart pound and you're like, oh, I don't know how this is going to go. But if you deliver information with a loving attitude and with an attitude of like, I am here and I'm telling you this, not because I want to make you feel bad, but because I want to help and nobody else on the team can say it. Especially if everybody's seeing the same thing, the worst thing that's going to happen to me is the family will stop working with me And that has never happened after one of these difficult conversations. And it doesn't mean that every difficult conversation is going to yield the results that you want, because you're not going to change home life. Like, we can't change the culture of a family home. It's the parents that really have to do that. But that has been a huge takeaway and kind of blessing of this work that we get to do, is that we can say the truth of what we see.
That's really helpful. I think that's something to keep in mind, because we've all had those times where we kind of go, do I gloss it over or do I really tell the truth? And that can be
you
really,
gotta time
really
it
hard.
right.
Yeah, exactly.
You gotta like drop those little nuggets along the way, prepping for that conversation of like wonderment and curiosity, and then having that conversation. There is definitely an art to the difficult conversation.
Yeah.
There is. And I think, one of the things that I think about, I have my master's in education, and I did not learn about all the different learning profiles and how it presents, and how I had no idea all the ways that things look, and it might not be what you think it is. And so I really would recommend to teachers when they're getting their continuing education, to look into continuing education that talks about different learning profiles and how to help with executive functioning and doing all of those things, because ignorance is not bliss in this scenario. Because when I learned, I think back, that's what was going on with that kid.
Right. Yeah. Knowledge is power in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
That is awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and our audience. We are so happy that we had you here today. How can our audience connect with you after this episode?
So you can connect. Steph and I, it sounds like we're in business together, but we collaborate on our podcast. We have separate businesses. So you can check out my business, which is Kapp Educational Therapy Group. The website is www.Kapp at Therapy, Kapp at Therapy. My Instagram is the same. Steph's website, I'll just say, is My Ed Therapist in Redondo Beach, California, but her website is myedtherapist.com. And then definitely go check out our podcast. The mission of our podcast, which is called Learn Smarter, the Educational Therapy Podcast, is to expand awareness about educational therapy and also offer up a lot of strategies that we're using one-on-one in sessions to our audience, which are teachers, learning specialists, parents, because not everybody has access to educational therapy, either by geographic location or financial access, or we only have so many hours in the day that we can work with learners too. So there's a lot of things preventing kids from accessing ed therapy. And so hopefully our podcast serves as a resource to families and teachers that want to learn more.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. I hope you took away as much from that awesome interview as I did. I know there's lots of tips and ideas and even just change of thinking and perspective that I'm going to bring into my classroom to help improve my teaching and support my students with a variety of different learning profiles. All right. You can get show notes for this episode by going to educalm.com. That's EDUCALME/TBE134, as in the Balanced Educator, episode 134. So again, that's educalm.com/TBE134. All right. If you enjoyed this episode and got value from it, we would love it if you shared it with someone that you think would enjoy it too. Our goal here is to support teachers and to help them to live a more balanced and joyful life, both in and out of the classroom. So if you can help us to connect with teachers that would enjoy our podcast, that would mean the world to us. Thank you so much for being part of this community. We appreciate you and all the work you're doing in the world. Have a wonderful week.